I'm going to try reaching out to him one more time. Okay, this meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Thank you. All right. So, Hare Krishna, everyone. I'm going to be covering a couple of verses today from Canto 3. So, without further ado, let's get started. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Paravarisham Bhagavan Ratani Shrutani me Vyasamukhadavikshnam Abhikshnam Atrupnam Aptrupnamakshula Sukha Vahanam Desham Rate Krishna Katham Ratau Ghat. The synonyms: para, higher; avaresham, of these lower; Bhagavan, O my Lord; O Great One; vratani, occupations; shrutani, heard; me, by me; vyasa, mukhat, from the mouth; avikshnam, repeatedly; atrupnuma, I am satisfied; kshula, little; sukha, avahanam, that which causes happiness; tesham, out of that; rite, without; Krishna Katha, talks about the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna; amrita, oghat, from the nectar. Translation: O my Lord, I have repeatedly heard about these higher and lower statuses of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva, and I'm quite satiated with all these lesser subject matters and their happiness. They have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics about Krishna. Let me read that again. O my Lord, I have repeatedly heard about these higher and lower statuses of human society from the mouth of Vyasadeva, and I'm quite satiated with all these lesser subject matters and their happiness. They have not satisfied me with the nectar of topics about Krishna. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Because people are very much interested in hearing social and historical presentations, Srila Vyasadeva has compiled many books such as the Puranas and Mahabharata. These books are reading matter for the mass of people, and they were compiled with a view to reviving their God consciousness, now forgotten in the conditional life of material existence. The real purpose of such literatures is not so much to present topics of historical references, but to revive the people's sense of God consciousness. For example, Mahabharata is the history of the Battle of Kurukshetra, and common people read it because it is full of topics regarding the social, political, and economic problems of human society. But factually, the most important part of Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita, which is automatically taught to readers along with the historical narrations of the Battle of Kurukshetra. Vidura explained to Maitreya his position of being fully satiated with the knowledge of mundane social and political topics and having no more interest in them. He was anxious to hear transcendental topics regarding Lord Sri Krishna, because there were insufficient topics directly concerning Krishna in the Puranas, Mahabharata, etc. He was not satisfied and wanted to know more about Krishna. Krsna Katha, or topics regarding Krishna, are transcendental, and there is no satiation in hearing such topics. Bhagavad Gita is important on account of its being Krsna Katha, or speeches delivered by Lord Krishna. The story of the Battle of Kurukshetra may be interesting for the mass of people, but to a person like Vidura, who is highly advanced in devotional service, only Krsna Katha, and that which is dovetailed with Krsna Katha, is interesting. So that is a key part of this purport. This is the key part of why Vidura is saying that he's satiated with he's heard about all these lower topics, and he's satiated or in other words, he's, saturated in a sense, to have heard about these lesser topics, but still, it is still on the mundane platform. When the same thing, so when Vyasadeva wrote the Mahabharata also, when he compiled the Mahabharata, it was also done in a way that it could, first of all, educate the masses, the masses of common people that had interests, mundane interests in political and social and historical events. And but the difference is that by connecting all of those in the Mahabharata to Krishna, it becomes transcendental, right? So that's the key here, because when things are not connected to Krishna, they're just mundane topics. But the same things, when they are connected to Krishna, related to Krishna, just for example, take our daily services, conducting our work, looking after our families, performing our prescribed duties. All of these things are mundane otherwise, right? Before we came to Krishna consciousness, we were all doing it and we're still doing it. The only difference is that we have now connected everything that we used to do and that we do today and we continue to do today with Krishna. That's what makes mundane spiritual or transcendental, right? And that's what Vyasadeva was trying to do. Bring the common man, elevate the common man gradually. I mean, if you're going to talk about God, they're going to be the first ones to say, well, I'm not interested, or this is not the right time. Maybe when I turn 70 or 80 years, I'm going to get to it. But Vyasadeva's strategy was bring people, the common person, the masses, through the mundane platform, connect that to Krishna. And when it is connected to Krishna, then it becomes transcendental. And Vidura is taking, that approach even further, saying, hey, I want to know more about Krishna's pastimes directly, right? So I've heard about the Mahabharata. I've heard about all of these socio-political issues, the historical events that took place. All that is fine. But now I want to know more about Krishna, also because Vidura is not one of the common masses of people, right? He is not a common man. He is a highly advanced devotee of the Lord. And we will be talking about that, in the next verse. So moving on. Where was I here? Okay, the story of the Battle of Kurukshetra may be interesting for the mass of people, but to a person like Vidura who is highly advanced in devotional service, only Krishna Katha and that which is dovetailed with Krishna Katha is interesting. Vidura wanted to hear of everything from Maitreya, and so he inquired from him, but he desired that all the topics be in relationship with Krishna. As fire is never satisfied in its consumption of firewood, so a pure devotee of the Lord never hears enough about Krishna. Historical events and other narrations concerning social and political incidents all become transcendental as soon as they are in relationship with Krishna. That is the way to transform mundane things into spiritual identity. The whole world can be transformed into Vaikuntha if all worldly activities are dovetailed with Krishna Katha. There are two important Krishna Kathas current in the world, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhagavad Gita is Krishna Katha because it is spoken by Krishna, whereas Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna Katha because it narrates about Krishna. Lord Chaitanya advised all his disciples to preach Krishna Katha all over the world without discrimination, because the transcendental value of Krishna Katha can purify one and all from material contamination. Quickly moving on to the next verse, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 11. Kastrapnuyatita pado bidhanat satre suvaha suribhir idyamanat yakannanadim purushasya yato bhavapradam geha ratim chinnati. Kaha, who is that man? Tripnuyat, that can be satisfied. Tirthapada, whose lotus feet are all the places of pilgrimage. Abhidhanat, from the talks of. Satreshu, in human society. Baha, one who is. Suribhi, by great devotees. Idyamanat, one who is so worshipped. Yaha, who, Karnanadan, in the holes of the ears, Purushasya, of a man, Yataha, entering, Bhavapradam, that which awards births and deaths, Geharatim, family affection, Chinnati, is cut off. Translation: who in human society can be satisfied without hearing sufficient talk of the Lord, whose lotus feet are the sum total of all places of pilgrimage, and who is worshipped by great sages and devotees? Such topics can cut off one's bondage to family affection simply by entering the holes of one's ears. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Krsna Katha is so powerful that simply by entering into a person's ear, it can at once give deliverance from the bondage of family affection. Family affection is an illusory manifestation of the external energy, and it is the only impetus for all mundane activities. As long as there is mundane activity and the mind is absorbed in such engagement, one has to undergo the repetition of birth and death in the current material nescience. People are most influenced by the mode of ignorance, and some are influenced by the passionate mode of material nature. And under the spell of these two modes, a living being is actuated by the material conception of life. The mundane qualities do not allow a living entity to understand his real position. The qualities of both ignorance and passion strongly bind one to the illusory bodily conception of the self. The best among the fools who are thus deluded are those who engage in altruistic activities under the spell of the material mode of passion. Bhagavad Gita, which is direct Krsna Katha, gives humanity the elementary lesson that the body is perishable and that the consciousness which is spread throughout the body is imperishable. The conscious being, the imperishable self, is eternally existent and cannot be killed under any circumstances, even after the dissolution of the body. Anyone who misunderstands this perishable body to be the self and who works for it in the name of sociology, politics, philanthropy, altruism, nationalism, or internationalism, under the false plea of the bodily conception of life, is certainly a fool. That's Srila Prabhupada's strong language, is certainly a fool and does not know the implications of reality and unreality. Some of them are above the modes of ignorance and passion and are situated in the mode of goodness, but mundane goodness is always contaminated by tinges of ignorance and passion. Mundane goodness can enlighten one that the body and the self are different, and one in goodness is concerned with the self and not the body. But due to being contaminated, those in mundane goodness cannot understand the real nature of the self as a person. Their impersonal conception of the self as distinct from the body keeps them in the mode of goodness within the material nature. And unless they're attracted by Krsna Katha, they will never be liberated from the bondage of material existence. Krsna Katha is the only remedy for all people of the world because it can situate one in pure consciousness of the self and liberate one from material bondage. To preach Krsna Katha all over the world, as recommended by Lord Chaitanya, is the greatest missionary activity, and all sensible men and women of the world may join in this great movement started by Lord Chaitanya. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. Hare Krishna to you all. I know some of you are in Gita Nagari in the blissful association of a lot of Vaishnavas as His Holiness Rampal Maharaj is covering some very key and important and interesting topics from the Ramayana this weekend, this beautiful Memorial Day weekend. And there are some of you that are attending the Sadhu Sangha, which is also a very attractive association of the Vaishnavas, which is happening over the weekend in Dallas. But there are a few of you who are here with us, and I'm so thankful to you for joining us for today's class. This is a very important text in this chapter, especially, and also within the third canto, so to speak of. So just a little backdrop here. So we're reading from the third canto, from the fifth chapter of the Bhagavatam. Vidura has just arrived in Haridwar, which is the source of the Ganges, and there in a secluded place is meditating Maitreya Muni. And so Vidura has come to meet this great sage. And Vidura wastes no time in posing his questions about the source of creation and all the truths about Lord Sri Krishna to Maitreya Muni. And again, he did this by design and with all humility, because the common man cannot understand the Lord directly. Like we discussed in the previous verse, one has to be brought from the mundane platform to the transcendental or the spiritual platform. So if Vidura was to ask Maitreya Muni directly about the Lord, these are all lessons for us. These are lessons for the common man. These are lessons for the masses. So if he were to ask about Krishna, it may just either go over people's heads or may not be of interest, right? Because they may not be in the zone. So Vidura is also following the strategy of Vyasadeva and bringing people slowly into that zone by asking about creation, about the universes. What is the source for all of that? How did this life all come to be? And by doing so, because these are all matters of importance. Why is NASA spending billions of dollars trying to send rockets to the moon and other planets, right? Why is there this interest that, the strong interest that man has, which is all about, what is the source of life? Where did we come from? What is there life elsewhere? So we're constantly asking ourselves these questions, which on a very mundane platform, though, right? And so Vidura is trying to ask these questions, the same questions, and in turn showing the importance of these questions and the knowledge from these questions that one can gain from sages, advanced sages like Maitreya Muni, to be able to relish and recognize that there is a higher power, there is a supreme power, there is a supreme intelligence behind all of this. It couldn't have just happened randomly, through the order of selection, or so through the, theory of evolution or the Big Bang theory and all of these things that, the scientists can only go so far. So they're able to give us only rational explanations up to a certain point. Beyond that, they don't have a clue, right? In fact, scientists, even till today, they haven't been able to explain the first 4 seconds of what happened before the Big Bang happened. Yeah, the Big Bang happened according to scientific and mathematical calculations, perhaps. But what happened in the first 4 seconds? They don't have a clue. And they admit that, right? So they don't really know what the actual source is. But for the common man, it is a little more understandable, and because they're searching for these clues and they're trying to answer these questions. And so when they're looking at this topic of what came about creation, it is huge, right? They understand that this is not just our planet. We're not one planet. There are billions of planets and billions of planets within billions of universes. So the scale and magnitude is beyond our material senses, right? And how could that all have happened, right? So when we speak about that, and therefore when Vidura is asking about these questions or asking these questions, he is highlighting the fact that, hey, this is so important because it is beyond our senses. It is so huge, the magnitude of the subject matter, that there has to be something and someone behind all of this. So he's getting us to that point. And that is pointing in the direction of Sri Krishna. And he knows that. He knows that. Substantively, he knows that. He's a very advanced devotee. But he is also wanting to hear it again from Maitreya Muni, who's also a super advanced and elevated personality. And that's all for our benefit of the common person. Okay, let's rewind a little more, right? So Vidura meets Uddhava, as he's going through his pilgrimage and he's getting to the end of his pilgrimage, he meets Uddhava, who's just been instructed by Lord Sri Krishna about having to go to Badrikashrama. Krishna instructs him and says, proceed immediately to Badrikashrama. And so he is in that mode of actually leaving, knowing very well that Lord Krishna has ended his pastimes and he is about to return to the spiritual abode. So Uddhava, being very, very close to Krishna, is in great grief himself. I mean, he doesn't want to leave the association of Krishna. In fact, even after Krishna tells him, Uddhava, leave for Badrikashrama right now, Uddhava still follows him through a certain distance because he's not able to leave Krishna and, knowing that he won't be seeing Krishna anymore, at least in this material planet. Now, why did Krishna pick Uddhava? That's a different story. I mean, so there's a huge background behind all of that. But to put it in short, Krishna wanted Uddhava to be able to preach the science of Krishna consciousness. So because the whole Yadu dynasty is gone, someone has to be there to be able to tell us and relate Krishna's pastimes and the science of Krishna consciousness to the common man following, right? And so that was Krishna's plan, according to our acharyas, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti, that Uddhava remain on this planet Earth even after all the eternal associates of Krishna pretty much were back, or heading back towards their respective spiritual planets. Okay. Now, Vidura learns about this whole episode of the Yadu dynasty, being eliminated, destroying themselves practically through the plan of Krishna again. And he's also aware that Krishna is leaving this planet and the pastimes are over. And so he is in great grief. So he's asking Uddhava, please relieve me of this grief. Please tell me more about Krishna. Please tell me about the pastimes of Krishna. Please tell me about, the science of Krishna consciousness. It's not that Vidura doesn't know, right? Like we spoke about. But then Uddhava politely declines that and says, look, Vidura, I have to go. I'm on a mission. I've been instructed to go straight to Badrikashrama, and I'm in grief myself, right? So I'd like for you to instead suggest an alternative. Meet with Maitreya Muni. He is nearby, and you can ask him all your questions, and he is most qualified to, describe to you what you need to know. So, in spite of that, Vidura and Uddhava continue to talk through the evening, through the day, through the evening, and through the night. And when the sun comes up early in the morning, they set about their ways. So Uddhava heads towards Badrikashrama and Vidura heads towards Hardwar, where Maitreya Muni was meditating. So you may wonder why Vidura is asking these basic questions, something that he already knows, right? And especially Vidura. I mean, Vidura was no ordinary personality. Like we've been talking about this over the last several weeks. He was great Yamaraj in his previous life. He was unfortunately, within quotes, I should say, unfortunately, and I'll explain why, because he was cursed by Mandavya Muni to come down to this material earth as a son of a Vaishya. And now that may seem like a curse, right? I mean, if you look at it, it's actually a blessing in disguise. Why? Because Yamaraj, think about it, Yamaraj could get the opportunity of having the personal association of Krishna in this material world. I mean, can you imagine Yamaraj's role? Can you imagine Yamaraj's role in Patalok? Patalok is a place where no one wants to be, right? Yamaraj is there day in and day out, performing his services. And what was his service? His service was to dole out punishments to these hardcore and hardened criminals and rascals, right, that have completely abused and misused their lives, right, from all the other worlds. And he was doing this in service to Krishna. He was doing this in service to Krishna, and not for a day or two, not for a year or two, but for millions and millions and millions of years. I mean, just think about it. Would you like to take up Yamaraj's role? Would anyone like to take up Yamaraj's role, for that matter, and relocate from Naperville to Patalok? Now, on a lighter note, and this is one of my favorite, memories or fond memories of our times initially when we were getting started, even here in Naperville, in terms of Krishna consciousness. There were just a few of us, as you know, and sometimes I sound like a stuck record here, but it gives me great pleasure in seeing where we are today from where we were not too long ago. And we were just six of us who would meet on Fridays, right, in the basement of Preeti Mataji, who is now Preeti Lakshana Mataji, and Ashok Prabhu, who is now Ananga Mohan Prabhu now. I mean, with all gratitude to both of them, they would somehow attract us to come on a Friday evening to their home. And there were just six of us who would meet there for a Bhakti Viksha. We didn't even know what it meant at that point in time. And we would have His Holiness Chandramauli Maharaj visit us all the way from Kishore Kishori in Rogers Park to come down to Naperville to facilitate the Bhakti Viksha. And it was so interesting because when he would come now, he would need a ride, obviously, and he had a designated driver that would drive him all the way from there to here. But we used to have such a wonderful association with Chandramauli Maharaj. And when it was time to go back to the temple for the night, he would ask one of us to go and call this devotee to ready the car. And the thing was that devotee would never be a part of the Bhakti Viksha. He would always be outside the home. He would be in the garden or in the front yard, chanting away very, very intensely, very intensely. So we would wonder sometimes, why is Maharaj asking us to go and call this devotee when, he knows the devotee personally, and he can say, devotee, hey, so-and-so, get the car going and let's head back. But then he had Maharaj would have a mischievous look on his face, a smile on his face. I'm not going to call him. And you know why? Because that devotee's initiated name was Yamaraj. No one wants to call Yamaraj, leave alone taking or playing the role of Yamaraj, even for a minute or a moment, right? Yeah. So anyway, that was on the lighter side. So Vidura was Yamaraj himself. And he was an exalted personality. And as Maitreya describes Vidura later in the chapter, he describes him as an eternal associate of the Lord. So here we go again. We're asking ourselves, why Vidura? Why Vidura? Why someone like Vidura? One who is a devotee, a pure devotee of the Lord, an eternal associate of the Lord, is asking to know about the Lord himself. It's not like he didn't know, right? Now, initial thoughts, it's because he can all he can do at this stage, when he's heard about the demise of the Yadu dynasty, he's heard about, Krishna ending his pastimes and leaving. He was in uncontrollable grief. And by hearing about the transcendental pastimes, now remember what I said earlier, anything that is connected, even the Mahabharata for that matter, right, to begin with, even though it is a lower topic in Vidura's eyes, because it is considering socio-political topics and historical events, but then it is connected to Krishna, right? Because Krishna played a central role in all of that. And therefore, that mundane topic is now transcendental. That's what we discussed earlier today, right? So just by hearing more about Krishna, and Vidura is asking for more. Now he's like, okay, that's good enough. You spoke about the Mahabharata, and I've heard several topics on that. I mean, I've heard that topic several times. But now I would like to hear more about Krishna as a person, Krishna, and his pastimes. And when he's saying that, he's looking for relief as well. By hearing about the transcendental topics of Krishna, he is relieving himself of all that uncontrollable grief that he's going through. Now, that is the beauty of hearing Krishna Katha. And that's where we're going with this. This verse is focused on Krishna Katha. Why is Krishna Katha so attractive? Why is Krishna Katha so important? Because, and we will get to that in this rest of this session, because it transports one directly into the transcendental realm of the absolute truth. Absolute truth is Krishna himself. Now, this transcendental knowledge is being referred to as the lotus feet of the Lord. Okay, let's get a little deeper into why, because we keep hearing this, right? A lot of references being made to the lotus. Why lotus? Now, the lotus is an important symbol, whether it is Hinduism, Jainism, Confucianism, Baha'ism, thisism and thatism. I mean, you see the majority of the religions, especially on the eastern side of our world, that represents over 1.5 billion people worldwide. Okay, so lotus is constantly referred to, either the divinities are sitting on or standing on or emanating from the lotus, like the stem of the lotus, we are told, emanates from the navel of Vishnu. And from that lotus comes Lord Brahma, who is the Lord of creation in our universe. Similarly, the lotus pose is one of the most important poses, key poses in yoga as it is practiced even today. And even in Buddhism, one of the key sutras is the Lotus Sutra, right? It is one of their most sacred texts. So the lotus flower, I mean, if you look at it even from a different angle, the lotus flower symbolizes purity, beauty, and resilience, right? Think about it. The lotus blooms during the day, coming out of muddy, dirty waters, right? And it comes out during the day, blooms beautifully in total perfection. The lotus is always perfect in its form. And then at night, it just retracts back into the muddy waters. And then the next day again, it comes out completely untouched. And that's the beauty of the lotus, right? It's resilience. It's able to survive even in the muddiest of waters. And what is this? Why is it symbolic? Because the muddy waters is what we're living in. This material world that we're living in is by no means clean. It is one of the dirtiest places. Of course, there are lower planets, like what we spoke about, Patalok, right? Sutala, Atala, and all of the other planets, the lower planetary systems, they get progressively depraved and worse. And it is so muddy and dirty. But to be able to remain like a lotus flower, the living example, I mean, the most recent example that we can think about is Srila Prabhupada, being that lotus, he was in this material world, but not of the material world, right? He was able to spread Krishna consciousness even amidst all of the challenges and adversities that he faced, and the association that he initially had to face with all the hippies around, and even being in a new culture for him, it was totally, totally new. We grew up in an MTV culture before we came to the US. Even as we were in school, we were exposed through the media and other things as to what the West was all about. And, we're here. When Prabhupada, when he came here, he didn't have all of that. And he was completely faced with adversities that none of us can even imagine. The weather, his age, his heart attacks, and dealing with the association, the lack of any funds, money, and even the little that he had was stolen. Thinking of all of these things, he was like a lotus, completely resilient, and he was able to not just sustain himself, but was able to spread Krishna consciousness. That's what a lotus does, right? It is able to purify everything around it, in its presence. The muddy waters may continue to be muddy to a certain extent, but then the lotus in itself doesn't become muddy, right? It emanates purity. Okay, so we hear direct references of the lotus in so many different texts throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, throughout the other scriptures that we have, throughout the Bhagavad Gita. And one that is of interest to me, at least what resonates to me, one of the descriptions that I really, really like is, Nama Pankaja Nabhaya, Nama Pankaja Maline, Nama Pankaja Netraya, Namaste Pankajangre. Okay, Nama Pankaja Nabhaya, paying my obeisance, my respectful obeisances to the personality whose navel resembles the Pankaja or the lotus, right? And we know that the stem of the lotus emanated from or emanates from the navel of Lord Vishnu. Nama Pankaja Maline, one who is always decorated in the garland of lotuses. Nama Pankaja Netraya, whose glance is so cooling that it relieves even the person in most distress. He has the cooling effect of the lotus. Namaste Pankajangre. So I offer my humble and respectful obeisances unto the soles of whose feet are engraved with lotuses. What a beautiful description. So this transcendental knowledge, now that we've spoken about the lotus, this transcendental knowledge is referred to as the lotus feet of the Lord. Now, as devotees in Krishna consciousness, we also hear about the dust of the lotus feet. And I've asked my spiritual master, I've asked His Holiness Rampada Swami Maharaj, I said, we hear about the dust of the lotus feet. What does that really mean? His response to me was, the dust, while the lotus feet is the transcendental knowledge, the dust of the lotus feet are the instructions given to us by our spiritual master, by our preceptors. And that absolutely makes sense to me. It resonated because that's what we want to be, in the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord, because the dust is where the pure devotees are able to give us the instructions that we need to be able to conduct ourselves and to be able to get ourselves out of this material mess that we live in. So with knowledge, we develop detachment. And then when we get to that stage of knowledge and detachment, we're said to be in the stage of self-realization. However, keep in mind, knowledge without detachment is useless. It's like rain on the back of a buffalo, right? The water just pours down and it goes down the buffalo. Nothing really impacts the buffalo. The buffalo is doing its own thing. Knowledge is like that. If we don't hear properly, that knowledge is just going to bounce off our craniums, our heads, our skulls, and go away, dissipate and disappear. But if we allow it to come through our ears into our hearts in the proper way from a pure devotee, then it sticks, it stays within us. And when it stays within us, we achieve this taste. Taste for what? Taste for devotional service, right? Now, what is this taste? This taste is mercy, mercy from Krishna himself to draw us closer to him. Otherwise, how can we even imagine getting out of this dark, dark well of material existence all by ourselves and get closer to Krishna? Not leave alone getting out of this well, but being able to get closer to Krishna. I mean, how can we even imagine, right? It's not possible. It's only through his causeless mercy and his instruments like the pure devotees and the Vaishnavas that come to give us this transcendental knowledge. And when we think of Krishna, when we remember Krishna, when we serve Krishna, we immediately have the association of Krishna. I mean, think about that. Think about that. When we remember Krishna, when we are drinking even water, I mean, this is something that I'm habituated to. The moment I'm drinking water, I'm thinking, the verse where Krishna says, I am the taste of the liquid, right? He says, he doesn't say I'm the taste in the liquid. He says, I'm the taste of the liquid. So in other words, every time I drink water, I'm thinking of Krishna. I say, Krishna, you're so merciful. You're the taste of the water that I'm drinking, right? Just that remembrance in itself is associating with Krishna. So just by receiving this priceless mercy, we are immediately engaging with Krishna. And as we know, there is no difference between Krishna, his name, fame, form, and qualities and pastimes, right? Now, there are many others who will practice different yoga systems and get into all of these various austerities and eventually, reach Krishna. However, they have to endure intense austerities. Think about that. They have to endure intense austerities over an extended period of time. And that is very difficult because you need to be in that particular posture, contorted, difficult postures. I mean, these are challenging postures. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they're difficult postures. The various kinds of yogic postures, even the Ashtanga yoga. I mean, if you're a practitioner, it is not easy for a beginner or even an intermediate practitioner to get into those poses and sustain those poses over an extended period of time. So what happens, yes, if you get to the stage, when you eventually reach that stage after a long, long, long time of practice of that yoga, you may eventually, if you're in the right consciousness, be able to get that momentary, that fleeting, transient glimpse of Krishna. And the moment that posture is gone or the meditation is broken, Krishna is gone. You're no longer thinking, you're no longer in the association of Krishna. It's gone, right? So you could spend a lifetime practicing yoga, but then there is no guarantee that you are going to be able to achieve Krishna. Whereas for a devotee of Krishna, in contrast, Krishna has made it so much easier through his causeless mercy. All he says we should do is do it as a service to me. Whatever you're doing, do it as a service to me. Yat karoshi yad ashnasi yad juhosi dadasi yad yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. So he's telling us that whatever we do, whatever we eat, whatever we offer, whatever penances that we perform, do it as an offering to him, to Krishna. And when we do that, we can very easily achieve Krishna. And not only that, for a devotee who's already engaged and always engaged in devotional service, then Krishna is there. He is there. You don't even have to ask. It's both a means to the end and the end itself, which is being in the association of Krishna, which is being in the service of Krishna. That is the beauty of devotional service. It is permanent, it's eternal, and it is immediate. If we are in the right consciousness, we can associate with Krishna almost, not almost, but immediately. The question is, how much commitment do we have? What is that level of consciousness? How pure is that consciousness? We are souls, tiny little souls that are constantly bombarded by Maya and the external energy. And that's what prevents us prevents us from getting into that state of pure consciousness. So that's what we need to work on. And that is why we practice Krishna consciousness. Because as we journey through this, as we practice Krishna consciousness, we're journeying to a point where it becomes totally natural, right? There's nothing superficial about it. It is natural, it is organic, it is within us in terms of being able to get into that or be or stay in that state of pure consciousness. In the morning prayers that we do, in the arti that we do, in the Guru Ashtaka, Praptasya Kalyana Gunarnavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravindam. So Prabhupada says, one who's received the mercy of the Supreme Lord is Praptasya Kalyana by definition, right? In that verse, he says, a cloud is formed by receiving the mercy of an ocean, right? A cloud is never formed by the mercy of maybe some tap water. In contrast, so you can say, and Prabhupada says this, here's water now. What are you going to receive in terms of mercy by getting some tap water, right? He says we have to receive the mercy of the ocean. Praptasya Kalyana Gunarnavasya. So the Gunarnavasya is the ocean of mercy that we need to receive. That is the mercy that we are receiving when we are given this transcendental knowledge and we use this transcendental knowledge in devotional service. That is the power of Krsna Katha, right? So this whole focus is about Krsna Katha, don't forget. And that is why even a pure devotee like Vidura is never satiated with hearing about Krishna, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that is the higher reason for Vidura's repeated questions to Uddhava and then to Maitreya. We are like, he's already asked this question. Why is he asking this again and again and again, right? This is the higher reason. Because Krsna Katha is the one that will relieve us and bring us to that platform of being able to associate with the Lord. And this attraction for Krishna grows even more exponentially when one is in the mood of separation. Right? The love in separation, or vipralamba, the vipralamba bhava, is even greater than being in a direct association with the Lord. There are so many examples that we read about, we hear about in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the gopis are in intense separation from Krishna. Similarly, Uddhava, we hear about. He's in intense grief. The Pandavas, even during their exile, and now even Vidura. Okay, so I know we're very close to time here. So I'd like to end with one other thing. This may sound a little off track, maybe, maybe a little on the side here, but it has a relevance. I just would like to create a contrast for some of us, we're still, dealing with a lot of things around us in our day-to-day lives. A simple example here is, the latest movie venture, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. That's a movie that was just released a few weeks ago. And the amazing part is that even in the first few weeks, it grossed over $385 million And in the recent past, Marvel has released several such movies and other blockbuster movies that have grossed over $100 million at a minimum. In fact, there was one that grossed over $856 million, and this was a movie called Venom. And again, these are statistics that I ran into, while I was preparing for class here. And the interesting part is $856 million for a movie. That's almost $1 billion. I mean, it is greater than the per capita of many smaller nations around the world. So in total, and if you think that is bad enough, in total, Marvel has grossed over 28 billion. That's a billion with a capital B. 28 billion worldwide, making it the biggest movie franchise ever. It's not Disney, it is Marvel. Why? So where I'm going with this is why? Why are these such big blockbusters? Why do they attract so many people into the movie theaters? If you think about it, there is this intrinsic urge within all of us to see the extraordinary. With all the sound effects and all the extraordinary moves, the superheroes like Spider-Man, like Superman, like Batman and Wonder Woman, flying through the air, to vanquish the equally powerful bad. I mean, you're talking about real bad superheroes. They're superheroes too, but they're really bad as well. So it makes the general public go completely hysterical, right? I mean, they want to go see it and see how, the superheroes jump into action and they're able to do this, that, and that. And with all these effects on the silver screen, the person who's sitting there with a bag of popcorn in that seat is looking at the silver screen, looking at their favorite superhero and is thinking, oh my God, look at that. He's doing something that I can never do. I wish. And in fact, some of them even imagine themselves in that superhero suit, with a cape and flying through the air and so on, right? Without getting too graphic about it, the common man is looking at these things because it attracts them for the simple reason that it is beyond ordinary powers, beyond what we as ordinary humans can do. Now, take that and contrast that with the pastimes of Krishna. Even as a little boy, he sucks the life airs out of Putana. And she dies in total agony, spreading her ugly, demonic body over 22 kilometers, is what we're told. He destroys the whirlwind demon, Trinavarta, who is sent to kill him. He tears apart Agasuran, we literally to save his Gopa friends. And what was Agasura trying to do? It was an evil snake demon that was trying to swallow Krishna and swallow all his friends, his Gopa friends as well. And there were many other demons that Krishna, the favorite pastimes that, a few are recounted again and again, but there were countless pastimes and countless demons that Krishna encountered and killed. I mean, it's completely unimaginable. The Agasura also, if you look at it, the Gopas were convinced that it was a huge cave. They didn't have the slightest clue that it was a demonic snake that was so huge, so big. And then as an adult in a different auras and in his other incarnations, Krishna also, fought the worst of the demons. The way he completely rips out Hiranyakashipu. And who was Hiranyakashipu? He was a super formidable demon that shook the three worlds in fear just by twitching his eyebrow. And mind you, Krishna did all of that without, he did this in reality, number one, and he did this with no cape or any costume. So Vidura could have asked about Lord Krishna directly. Instead, he asked about how the Lord created the universes and the science behind it. That in itself tells us who Krishna really is. He is the source of all creation, not just one universe or one planet or one star, but He is the source of all creation as we know and as we don't know yet. So, in summary, number one, we need to have a taste for Krishna. Okay, this is how Krishna extends himself to us. This is his causeless mercy. Krishna Katha has, and two, Krishna Katha has the power to bring us to Krishna instantly, right? When you think of Krishna, Krishna is with us, right? We're engaging directly with Krishna. And three, knowledge without detachment is useless, right? Remember, it's like rain on the back of a buffalo. So proper hearing is required so that this transcendental knowledge enters through our ears and enters our heart. And it softens our heart, opens our heart to receiving this mercy. We need to be able to receive this mercy that Krishna is giving us. This is causeless mercy that we are receiving. We need to constantly remind ourselves about that. And Krishna Katha is all about Krishna. He is our actual superhero. It's not Superman, it's not Spider-Man, right? It's not across this universe or that universe. He is across all creation, right? And he can not only maintain this creation, he not only has created all of this, he can also maintain them without even raising a little finger, right? He can be the dearest friend of the gopas. So one is creation, the other one is maintenance, but it's more than just being a superhero. You notice most of these superheroes are all by themselves, whereas Krishna is always in the association of his devotees. So he can be the dearest friend of the gopas, the dearest son of all of Raja, and he's our dearest well-wisher. At the end of the bottom line is that he's the well-wisher to all the living entities. No one can be a more merciful, personality to us. And we need to recognize that no matter what circumstance we're going through. So with that, I'd like to end today's discussion or end today's lecture. Hare Krishna, and see if anyone has any questions, comments, things that I may be able to answer and respond.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Please accept.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. As usual, so sweet and so, detailed, and also always churns my curiosity. Actually, there are multiple points I want to bring up from your talk, but the last one that you mentioned. Unfortunately, this is Kali Yuga and everything is measured in money. So, that's the only way we can measure the success of, these movies. The difference between these movies and Krishna Katha is, the movies will be forgotten a few years from now, in fact, a few weeks from now. And probably somebody will remember it as a classic at some point of time, may not. However, you look at Krishna Katha, it's at least 5,000 years old, the one that we are discussing. Whereas if you look at Ramayana, it's a few million years ago, even in the same Mahayuga cycle. And then we have not forgotten Ramayana, we have not forgotten Krishna Katha, and we still want to hear more and more of this. And nothing seems to satiate it. And that is exactly what Vidura is saying here. This is not satiating me. I want to hear more. I want to hear more. And we are only, to be frank, I'm still interested in Mahabharata and stuff like that. Vidura wants to go higher and higher, so no comparison with Vidura. That was one thing. The other thing that you mentioned was you talked about Big Bang and how, there are so many unanswered questions about it. Actually, there are so many controversies about it, Now, one of the first things that we learn when we come to Krishna consciousness is that our sense perception has its own limitations. Sometimes the limitations can deceive us. Sometimes it can lead us to wrong conclusions, or even defective conclusions. Now, the problem is when you look at Srimad Bhagavatam, it's very clearly said, Karnadakashai Vishnu is emanating so many universes out of his, body while he is in his yoga nidra. If you really look at Big Bang, we are talking about one such universe coming out of the Lord. And we can only think of that one universe, and we are talking about minus, the 0 second and -1, minus whatever, and we are trying to analyze that, and we think this is the utmost thing, but there are unlimited number of universes like that. And how do we talk about, are there so many Big Bangs? Are they really Big Bangs? so that's the second point. The third point is you refer to space travel and space exploration, because we are curious deep inside us. Yes, we are curious, but if you look at some of again, this is reflected in some of the movies recently. If you watched Avatar, the latest version, it's all about space exploration for getting minerals, money. It's all about monetizing whatever we have. And I still believe whatever exploration we are talking about is all about how do we exploit it. But like Prabhupada said, we will never be able to go and exploit. Forget, yesterday there was a news item saying, meet the astronaut who is going to live on Mars for a year and going to come back. And I was wondering, how can this be true? We have never got a spacecraft out of Mars, returned back to the Earth. There's projecting somebody and saying, hey, this is what is going to happen. And that is where Prabhupada's, harsh words, I would always think, why does Prabhupada say these things? Like rascals, fools, scientists, and when you see these sort of news that these people are trying to propagate, then I say, yeah, Prabhupada had that vision. He could very clearly see how, in the name of science, everyone is cheating us. So, and then if you really go a little further into, like a couple of more chapters, again, Vidura is going to ask about the Virat Rupa, and Virat Rupa is again explained from a different point of view. Again, what happens there is we can see, the difference between how great the Lord is and how minute we are. If we want to compare, it would be like, comparing myself to an atom. But the difference is the atom is still capable of doing its work, whereas I'm not capable of doing whatever I'm supposed to do. So I will stop there. These are 4 or 5 points I gathered from your talk, and they're very, very interesting. So I think I'll be rest of the day I'll be thinking about these things alone.
Wonderful. No, likewise. I'm constantly thinking. I grew up from in a science background. In fact, my parents would tell me, I don't quite remember. They would tell me that the very first prize I won in school was for science. When I was in my, I don't know, first standard, second standard, something like that. I don't remember that. But I've always been interested in the science, especially, at one point I wanted to become a space technologist, whatever that was. So I'm so glad. I'm so grateful to Guru Maharaj. I'm so grateful to Srila Prabhupada for, being here and putting things in perspective for us, right? But that's what people are lacking. It's not that people are not intelligent and that people cannot relate to these things. It's just that they're not exposed. They don't have, unfortunately, they haven't been given this mercy. They're not recipients of this mercy that we've received. We're so fortunate that if we hadn't come to Krishna consciousness, can you just imagine where we would have been? That 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years ago, we were introduced to Krishna consciousness and we are here. And imagine where we would have been otherwise. So Ruchira and I always, talk about that and think, man, we should be so grateful for where we are today because of everything that we've received through the mercy of Krishna and his instruments.
So you mentioned where we would have been, like that's a very interesting topic.
Not on Mars.
Yeah.
But maybe some place which would have led us to Patalok for sure.
I remember how I used to come to Premananda Mataji's house and I would drop Advita off. You were downstairs doing Bhagavad Gita. I would not come down until Premananda Mataji one day forced me to go downstairs. The thing today, when I look around, I have so many of my friends from those days around me who are like, oh, we are going to retire, kids are out of home. So what do we do? How do we occupy ourselves? And what do? They go and they buy, like AMC membership and whatever else and whatever not. And whereas we are so blessed to have the temple here, we are like struggling to find time. you know the temple, the community, everything occupies us so much. We are at a lack of time, versus others are like they're lack of activities. So
Totally.
thank you for bringing that up, Prabhuji.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Prabhu. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Your thoughts are always thought-provoking. So thank you again. Very insightful. So thank you for sharing that.
Hare Krishna, SriVallabha Prabhu. Please
Hare
accept my
Krishna.
humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. If
Hare
we still have him, and I know we're already over a bit. I was listening in the kitchen and had the the speaker on. I have my headphones in now, but one of the verses, the second verse, I believe you read, was Srila Prabhupada was speaking about the false attachment to the family, and that's one of the things that my wife has great difficulty with, or kind of one of her sticking points of why she isn't really connecting with Krishna consciousness, among other things. But I think that's one of the main ones. So when you're reading, kind of like, oh, maybe I should put my hand on the speaker. She's not going to like that part. But I think that might be a common theme also for preaching purposes too, with other Westerners that we've seen or might see in the future. And I was wondering if you could maybe share your take on how to present that to them in a way that's palatable.
Yeah, it's a great question, valid question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Can you please repeat his question? I missed that piece. I'm so sorry interrupting you.
If I understood you correctly, Achyuta Bhava Prabhu, I think your question was around the difficulty that your wife is having with this very thing about not being able to connect with Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada's statement in this particular verse, where he says, once you get the taste, you will even give up family attachments. So that could be a concern for a lot of people because, hey, we have to get through life. We have families, we're married, we have commitments. What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to become a saint and then, we're going to completely give up everything? Is that kind of distill, some of the intent behind your question, Prabhu?
Yeah, so I, for the most part, but maybe a little stronger where in the Bhagavad Gita, I believe, and may have been the Bhagavatam, I can't recall, but that I've often heard that the attachment, it's illusory. It's part of the material world. It's an illusory attachment that we have. And that comes up more often, I believe. I've heard it more often. And I think that's, so, but yes, along those lines.
Yeah. So, let me try an attempt. I know we could do an entire class on that. Because even if I take the example of how the effects of how illusory, right? When Prabhupada is saying illusory, he's referring to the temporary nature of our relationships in this material world. We could have friends today and they could be enemies tomorrow. Right? We could be in love today and we could be completely out of love tomorrow. In fact, not just completely be out of love, but actually go to the point of being, of developing hatred for the person. I mean, how many times when you turn on the TV, for instance, the news is talking about how the husband killed the wife or the mother killed the children, crazy things that are so wicked, so depraved. You wonder what would have caused a person to even get to that point, not just think about it, but to get to a point of actually committing that, such awful crimes.
Yeah.
And even when you look at the statistics, the America is probably one of the leading countries when it comes to that. But now almost all the other countries, I mean, when I go to India, half my friends are divorced. I'm like, guys, what are you thinking? You know, what's going on here? And I see the husband is doing his thing, the wife is doing her thing. They go to work in different places, and after work, you know, the husband goes to the bar to be with his friends. The wife goes to the bar, a different bar perhaps, or maybe even the same bar, to be with her friends. And guess what? The children have come back from school and they're sitting at home by themselves, you know, and if they're lucky, they may have a babysitter. So I see a lot of that happening every time I go back, you know, to see my family, my friends back in India, for instance. And I'm like, wow, you guys have completely overtaken the West in many ways, not just in technology, but even in the way you guys live. And you see the rate of divorce has gone up dramatically, significantly over the years, right? No one is really, and the lifespan people spend to stay together after getting married is like decreasing. We've heard of weddings where people go there, you know, celebrities going to Las Vegas to get married, and they're married for a day, and that's it. I think Madonna was one of them, right? So we're seeing that, and along with that is also growing the rate of depression, right? Mental illnesses. You know, people are getting into these states of mind because they're not able to deal with life that they thought would be in a certain way. Just the other day, I was not just yesterday, as we were driving out of our house here, our neighbor's daughter was getting out of the car. She was in her, you know, her a convocation, or you know, her what is it when you graduate? Yeah, graduation gown, because she's now graduated from high school. So you could see her; she was happy, thrilled, and all of that. And we were happy for her as well. But I was just telling Ruchira, you know, at that stage in life, we're only thinking about how we can conquer the world, because we're getting out in the world and we think we are, you know, up there and we can conquer the world. Little do we know the ground realities. Little do we know what the challenges we're going to be facing, the adversities that are going to hit us like concrete slabs, right? So that's when depression sets in, and people are disillusioned by what they thought, because their expectations were something else when they started out in life. Marriage is always going to be perfect. I'm going to find the perfect spouse, the perfect partner, but there's no such thing as a perfect spouse or a perfect love, even in this material world, right? And that's what Krishna is telling us, that all of this is illusory. All of this is illusory, whether you're the wife or whether you're the husband, whether you're the mother or you're the father, you're the, you know, child. There's no such thing as a perfect, sustainable relationship in this world. At some point in time, it is going to deteriorate just like everything else. A flower blooms and after a couple of days, it's gone, right? You buy a car, it's brand new, spanking new. It looks great as you're driving it out of the showroom. 2 years, 3 years down the road, you don't want to even look at it. It's rattling and it's you know, whatever. So everything in this material world only deteriorates. There's nothing that actually grows better. There's nothing like you know, you start as a butterfly and then you become an ugly caterpillar that crawls into this larva, right, into the pupa. I wish life were like that, but it's not. But as we get older, we get wiser. And if we're not getting wiser, we're actually, you know, depending on our tendencies, our past deeds, our, you know, our exposure to various circumstances in life, we develop a mindset. And culturally, we then tend to gravitate towards certain, you know, this way or that way, which may or may not be sustainable to what we would otherwise call perfect. Otherwise sustainable. No. So therefore, Krishna is saying, keep that in mind. He's not saying, leave your husband, leave your wife, leave your family, leave your job. No, he's not saying that at all. Even the Bhagavad Gita is saying, put things in perspective instead. Keep Krishna in the center of everything that you do. When you keep Krishna in the center, as opposed to me versus you directly, then there is no conflict. There's no conflict. When we recognize Krishna as the center and we are all serving Krishna, then it becomes so much easier, right? Because now that's a perfect peace formula, as Prabhupada says. When we recognize, and that's why 529 in Bhagavad Gita, right? Clearly, we are accepting Krishna as the center of the universe, center of creation, center of everything. And when we recognize that and we're serving Krishna, Gnatva Shantim Richiti, it is a perfect peace that we can achieve. Why? Because now the family as a unit is all serving Krishna as opposed to serving the spouse or serving the child and so on. And again, we're serving all of them and we're not changing any of that. The consciousness is changing. Therefore, it only increases your love because you're looking at that soul, not just the body, but looking at that soul as a soul that is also in service to Krishna, that is also a part and parcel of Krishna. And therefore, that mentality, that mindset is difficult to come by initially, but as you start practicing, you develop that mindset and that helps strengthen your relationship, if anything at all. Because if you didn't have that foundation or didn't have that knowledge, that relationship over time, due to the illusory effects, will deteriorate. It is just a matter of time. Bill Gates is one of the richest guys in the world, but he went through a divorce as well. You would think, hey, he had all, he still has a lot of money, enough money to feed maybe hundreds of generations after him. But then he doesn't have a life. He doesn't have a married life that he can be proud of. So that's what we need to keep in mind. So initially people may think, oh my God, by getting into spirituality, it's actually pulling us away from all of this, give up this, give up that, give up families, give up all of the fun stuff that we used to do. No, but if we can still have, all of the fun and we can still have all of that family relationship, and only gets better when we keep Krishna in the center. We're all doing it together, right? In the right consciousness, that's all we're saying. Prabhupada correctly, perfectly called this Krishna consciousness because all that is changing. It is not the activity itself, but it's the consciousness that we're changing. And that consciousness is keeping Krishna in the center. And when we do that, hey, you can still go to the ballpark. You can still cook the best meal. You can still have the best party. Only this party is going to be with a lot of kirtan with Krishna. So you can have a lot of good prasadam. You can, all of these things that you were otherwise doing, you're doing, but it's in a different consciousness, that's all. And therefore, it shouldn't be intimidating. You shouldn't feel or look at it or view it as something that I have to give up. We have to give up, as Rampad Maharaj would say, we have to simply give up the notion of having to give up something. It's not just giving up, but giving up the giving up, but giving up the notion of giving up something. So we're not losing our relationship. So that's what I would, look at it from that angle, whether it is a relationship or whether it is an activity that we're performing or things that we used to do. And now we feel like, oh, am I not going to be doing that anymore? I don't know if that helps, but that's the fundamental mindset that we need to nurture.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Long one. Like I said, we can do an entire class on this, but I try to, keep it to some fundamentals.
Brought up one saying that I heard, that every relationship is conditional. Except the one with Krishna.
Yes.
And I had one of my friends at the time saying, "No, my marriage is unconditional. I love my wife unconditional," and I didn't want to get into it with him, but well, your conditions might be extreme, but they're still conditions.
Very true, and that's of any marriage universally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that was helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? The good thing is that we're not running to our next meeting, and luckily it's just
right.
and it's a weekend and a long weekend. So I took the liberty of taking on a few more minutes here, almost half hour. But thank you for being with us, and thank you for the great questions. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Prabhu. If there's nothing else, then we can end the class.
Okay, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you again. Hare Krishna.